Now, I may not have been in the hobby since the beginning, but I have a deep love and appreciation for Oldhammer. And there are personal variations for what classifies as Oldhammer, and you might argue that some of what I'm going to talk about in this video is technically Middle Hammer. But when I'm talking about Oldhammer in the context of this video, I'm talking about Road Trader and the 80s and 90s metal minis, the old gritty style of Warhammer's roots. To look back and see how the designs have evolved over time gives you a deeper appreciation for the hobby. The history, the lore, the models, the artwork. The old art style is one of my favorites. Honestly, maybe even more so than the models. There is just something about the hand-drawn, dark, grungy style that I love. My own illustration style has been heavily influenced by artists like this. While you can say that some of the older sculpts are rough, you can't deny that they have a lot of personality. There's just something about hand-sculpted and raw crafted models that is unmatched for me. While today's models are crisp and amazingly detailed, sometimes you get lost in all that fine perfection. Maybe it's just the nostalgia talking, but I love the soul that the old models have. A piece of history frozen in time. I prefer the whimsy of some of the older models, taking orcs for example. They have so much character in their model sculpts and beliefs. The base design of their miniatures hasn't evolved too much over time, and in my opinion, they haven't needed to. They are still a bunch of silly boys, which is why I love them. I've painted my fair share of retro orcs, but I got my hands on some old Nurgle models and it gave me an idea. Some of my favorite artwork is for Chaos, especially Nurgle. It's gross, it's horrifying, and yet still a little silly if you think about it. I have one of the old Great Unclean Ones here from 1996, and he is a real hunk of metal. I did base coat him with some colors a while back, but I never got around to actually painting him, until now. I also have some old Nurglings, and Nurglings are arguably the best critters GW has ever created. This is totally a personal preference, but I will die on this hill. I think these guys could use a Garden of Nurgle to play in, so I'm gonna create one. In my previous video, I made terrain from trash. This is the whole point of painting necromancy, to repurpose things to make art. I have this box of failed FDM prints that was given to me. Yes, my friends send me trash and I love it. I glued these supports together to make creepy tree structures. I added some wire coming out of the top for support to build the branches off of. Then I sanded it down a little bit. This is to help the putty stick to the surface, but also to rough up some of those FDM print lines. I didn't sand all of them down because I didn't mind some of the texture of the lines showing through. I am working with a 50-50 putty mixture of green stuff and milliput to create the branches. Twisting it and using a sculpting tool with water to help create those creepy textures. Trypophobia warning, this unholy creation is about to get, well, very holy. Because it wouldn't really be Nurgle without it. It was almost therapeutic twisting and stabbing the putty. The best part about Nurgle is it's okay for it to look messy and gross, because that's on brand. I pushed some small round beads into the putty to create raised pustules. Once I was happy with the tree sculpts, I glued them to the base and added some putty around it. To build up the swampy base, I added some broken air-dried clay for rocks and filled in the areas with random green stuff bits. I've said this in previous videos and I'll say it again. Make random objects, twisty vines, rocks, whatever with your leftover putty. You never know when it might come in handy. I also added a few 3D printed mushrooms I had, because I like mushrooms. And of course, I'm filling the rest of it in with texture paste. I should really buy stock in this forbidden peanut butter. I took some reindeer moss and pressed it into the texture paint while it was still wet. This will skip the step of gluing it later on and have it more integrated into the dirt. If you do this, be careful while painting it. If you dry brush it too hard, it might break off. Once that's dry, I added strands of torn fabric drapings on top of the trees to create these mossy vines. You can do this with any frayed or pilling type of yarn, but I find the softer and fuzzier types work best. I rattle can primed this with Krylon Camouflage Dark Brown. This paint has a slight gritty texture to it, which will help hide some imperfections and print lines. The thick coverage also helps stiffen up the string. I used my airbrush to lay down the groundwork. I want to stick to the traditional Nurgle mucky colors, so I'll mostly be working with browns, greens, yellows, and reds. A big thank you to Army Painter for sending me their Fanatic paint lines to try out. I've been enjoying the air paints a lot lately. They're pretty thin, go through the airbrush pretty smooth, and layer up nicely. I also use the airbrush to splatter some paint on for a swampy texture. I used that Rawhide Brown to go over the Unclean One and the Nurglings as well. After a nice base blend, I switched over to my handy dandy hand brush and started to pluck out the details. Last Adepticon for US Golden Demon 2024, I entered an original Rogue Trader female warrior Gabs. It made me really happy to know that the judges gave it a nod of approval and a notable entry. But it was the overwhelming positive feedback from the community that surprised me and made me realize how many of us love seeing the older models. I wanted to do her justice and pay my respects to Warhammer's roots. I'm happy that model brought joy to people who saw it, and to me, that's what Golden Demon truly is about. Having the community see your creative concepts and pieces that mean something to them. I plan to enter an Oldhammer piece every year in Golden Demon, just for fun. My reason behind this is to remind people of how far the sculpts have come. To look back and honor the old artists and salute all the people who've been in the hobby since close to the beginning. One of those people being my friend Creationrites, who has been kindly feeding my OG Warhammer addiction over the years. For the Unclean One, I began dry brushing with a soft makeup brush to buff out all those details. I'm a fan of true metallics and love dry and overbrushing them for a beat-up gritty look. I applied some Knoll oil to the metal and left that alone for now, and began working on plucking out all those gross details, making sure not to miss any of those worms and maggots. I like to test out my glazes and opacity of paint on my skin, especially over my tattoos. This helps to see the coverage and flow clearly before it goes on a model. Edge highlighting and dabbing for texture as I go. Making sure to highlight every boil and blister. I dabbed a mixture of washes using a dark skin shade over the shadows, bruises, and bone areas, and a military green shade over the rest. To make him look slimy without glossing him, I brightly dotted some areas to make them seem shiny. I glazed red back into some of the fleshy bits. This guy lives in a swampy environment, so it made sense for his weapons to be rusty. The Nurglings got a similar treatment. Once I got everyone glued into place, it was time to add the slime. Well, resin that is. For shallow resin pours, I prefer to use hard UV jewelry resin. It's easier to control, less messy, quick to harden, and comes in many premixed colors. I went with a green that looked perfectly swampy. I'm able to put down drops and move it around to fill in the areas I want. You can layer it as well. I like using a toothpick, or in this case, a skewer to move it into place and pop any unwanted air bubbles. Normally I use a UV curing lamp, but since it was a nice sunny day, I placed this outside for a little bit to cure instead. I think this needs one final thing to finish it up. I've been holding on to this unopened old bottle of Goblin Green for a special occasion. Let's open it up and see if the paint is still good. Look at that. It's almost perfect. Now I know this isn't a gaming piece, but it still deserves a classic rim color.
Here, nothing ever truly ends, but is reborn and dies, and is reborn and dies, over and over again.
I really like the newer models Games Workshop has been producing, especially for Age of Sigmar, but my heart will always have a special place for Oldhammer. If you haven't experienced the old models, I definitely suggest getting your hands on some. They're fun. And if nothing else, they'll give you an appreciation for the current models. And if you still have your old miniatures, give them some love. And let me know in the comments, what is your favorite one you have? Thanks for watching. Now go make fun things.